Well, team, it's time for us to get the panel started, the most exciting part of being here today. And I want to get right into one of the questions that I think is on the top of everybody's mind. And Tim, I'm going to have you start with this one. And that is, can you tell us about your personal career path? What has led you to the CISO role?
Yeah, so it's probably a meandering path more so than many folks. But I had a career in the military. I retired from the Air Force after almost 23 years. I had a profession in the Air Force that some would not think related, but I was a bomb disposal guy, explosive ordnance disposal, as the military refers to it. And then from that, when I retired, I started to work for a bank. Initially, it was in a role as a construction program manager. And then as the bank started growing and we merged a lot of our subsidiaries into one, there was a need for a corporate office for security, information security corporate function. And I was invited to join that as a program manager there, starting a PMO, managing projects. And then from that, I evolved into owning, continuing to do that, but also owning access control and further evolved in that role, and then was recruited as a CISO of a bank in Connecticut. So did that for a while, was recruited back to SunTrust Bank in Atlanta, where I took on most of the roles that you would think about in security, as well as crisis management, disaster recovery, business continuity, et cetera. Big one was information governance as that was emerging, and then was recruited to Aflac in 2014 as the CISO, built out a global program, and by 2016 was the global CISO for Aflac.
Wow, what a diverse career path, Tim. Thanks so much for sharing that with us and our audience. And shout out to any other veterans that are on the line with us today, because it sounds like you had serving was a part of your journey as well. I want to give that question next to Mark Walmsley. Mark, can you tell us a little bit about your personal career path?
I think Tim and I share part of our middle journey when we were looking after programs and got into security, but mine is a mixed journey as well, and that's quite a common theme for most CISOs. So I started off as a private investigator through my family, joined British intelligence, spent a stint at MI5. Then I studied law, so I became a lawyer here at Freshfields as a litigator, and then moved into program management after I had enough of being a lawyer. So ended up working on complex IT programs and sort of fell into the role of security about 15 years ago, right at the beginning when businesses started to put in GRC and understand what their supply chain looked like, and it grew organically. And I wrote a presentation for Freshfields about the need to invest, and they said, right, that's it, you're doing the job, which I really didn't want, but fell into it anyway. And I've been the CISO here at Freshfields for about 10 years and have a secondary role at Freshfields as a managing director. So help the business run its operations as well as the security. And then 2 years ago, I went back to intelligence and helped set up the connection between UK law firms and GCHQ on NCSC, that arm of it. So I did a stint back there, and I'm always a bit worried when I go traveling to foreign off places, I'm going to get stopped by Border Force and asked about my history. But my journey in part is similar to Tim, at least at the beginning and then halfway through.
Yeah, wow. And, Mark, I kind of want to call you M moving forward on our session today, or 007 as one of our audience members says. Thank you for sharing that with us. And last but certainly not least, Mark Fitzgerald, can you tell us a little bit about your career path and how that landed you in the CISO role?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I'll be as brief as I possibly can. The early part of my career was primarily in IT and IT support, running help desk globally and supporting the mobile banking and email functions at an investment bank. I was asked to take over what was called at the time in the early 2000s data security, which was primarily issuing IDs and doing password resets at that time. It was all before all the big viruses and problems started occurring. Interestingly enough, to relate back to Varonis a little bit, if I could, we had a big audit problem where all the servers were going in with everyone access full control enabled. And there was a major audit finding, and there was no global way to resolve that. So that's where we made our initial decision, and we were one of the earliest customers to bring Varonis in back in, I'm going to guess, in 2005 or so. And with that, I journeyed on to implement a whole bunch of different products, point products, and solutions to solve some of the security issues that existed at that organization. And then in approximately 2016, I was asked to join Investors Bank as the first CISO that they had. And I came into a similar situation where they had a very immature program, only 4 people working there. And then over the prior 7 years, built out that program to be 16 people, more products, managed services, and things such as that. So that's kind of how I wound up where I am today.
Yeah, and we're always super glad to hear that Varonis was a part of that journey as well. Now, I've got a question for you guys, and we'll go in a little bit of a different order this time. And that is, I'd like to hear in your words, what is a CISO's role within an organization? And Mark W., I want to start with you, or M.
Love it. I think that might stick, unfortunately. The current role has changed a lot. It's now, in my opinion, a board advisory role. It used to be a very technical role. We saw people moving up to change some architecture type roles into it. It's very much a board level role now. It's advisory. In my opinion, and in the industry that I work in, the main job of the CISO is to provide balance to the board, security versus optimization of business, and to be able to put forward the best scenario that allows the business to be competitive. In the old world, it was more around, and we all got tagged with this, and maybe we still do. We get tagged with the no men or no women out there that don't want to do anything unless it is gold standard. And businesses are just not allowing that anymore. They're expecting this wide range of knowledge, but at management level. So it doesn't need to be particularly technical, but it certainly is board level advisory.
Yeah, thanks. And I think if there's other CISOs in our audience, they probably share a lot of those same sentiments. Now, Mark Fitzgerald, why don't you tell us about, for you, what was the CISO's role within the organization?
Pretty standard. Traditionally, the CISO is responsible for identity and access management, being one of the big pillars. The operations and engineering function that goes along with supporting IT. Coming on strong is the whole risk management aspect of this, where you identify your risks and determine which ones are critical and which ones you're going to address first. We put that underneath and include that in our GRC program, governance, risk, and compliance. So that fits nicely under there. We have a cybersecurity group as well. That's another pillar where we do the awareness training, vulnerability management gets done out of there. And then, as Mark had indicated, more and more, and I think we're going to be talking about this in more length as we go forward, but more and more board advisory, consulting with the business lines, approaching and trying to quantify which risks are real and how much money you want to spend on those risks. More and more, it's becoming that, as opposed to simply just operating the cyber or information security processes and programs.
Sure. And Tim, I think, given the reach of your role, you want to tell us a little bit about the CISO's role within your organization?
Sure. And I do think, I did a study, a paper at one time on kind of this topic. And what I've come to understand and believe is there's not a standard definition of a CISO, right? There's kind of the core that we hear, and you kind of surround that. But it largely depends on the company and other aspects of the company, the organizational aspects of the company. But so I have the traditional security ops, intelligence, the information security governance. We also have information governance, which we really look from the soup to the nuts kind of thing. So, or life cycle may be better. So we govern information as it's ingested into the organization, the life cycle, and then all the way to the disposal of information. Which, I've always believed that disposal of information is very important, a very big key to a security program, because obviously the less information you have, your risk goes down. So I have those aspects. I also have global crisis management, business resiliency, DR, business continuity under the realm. And again, that plays very strongly into our global strategy of resiliency. We believe that resiliency is building resiliency in the company is fundamental to protecting the company, protecting our customers and the assets. So I have that, as well as as mentioned. I'm certainly the board's go-to guy for advice, etc. I see my overall function is really as a risk manager. We initially, when we built the program, we certainly did an enterprise risk assessment. We do that annually and refresh that. As we've acquired different businesses and moved into different areas, obviously our risk profile changes. So we have to keep up with that and make sure that we're addressing the programs and implementing programs to address the risk. But fundamentally, it's my job to take the assets that I'm given and manage the program to the risk tolerance that's defined by our board of directors. I don't own the risk necessarily. I manage the risk. The risk ownership is really at the board level.
And I think, that's something that all three of you guys said that our audience should definitely take away, is that a big part of the CISO's role is understanding and putting risk mitigation plans in place. Now, obviously, the three of your organizations have CISOs. Well, I'm curious, and if our audience doesn't mind chiming in again here, just a simple yes or no will do. How many of you guys have a CISO at your organization? It's quite a mix. It was not as it's the word. It wasn't as ubiquitous as I was expecting. We've got a couple people with an outsourced or a virtual one, quite a number of no's, a few with some interim CISOs, a few that have some things that are kind of like where they're an executive that's wearing a couple of different hats. Really, really interesting. Thanks for sharing that with us. Now, our next question for the panel is, what do you think is the number one misconception about the CISO role? And Mark Walmsley, we're going to start with you on this one again.
Oh, I thought you might. Probably two things. One is, and we've already touched upon it, it's a technical role. I don't believe it is a technical role anymore. The second one is that the focus is quite specific. In my world, I own everything from physical security through to governance, risk and compliance, supplier assurance, cybersecurity, all of the standards. Is a very wide role, and therefore many people who are coming in looking at the job are coming from a technical perspective, or saying I need to be technical in order that I can qualify to do the job. And I don't think that's where it is anymore. It really is about the ability to manage teams of people, assimilate large volumes of data, and be able to give a simplistic view back to the world itself. But it is about that articulation, and it is about being polished and being able to explain really the direction of the business, although we don't own the risk. And many people do think that a CISO is ultimately accountable for the risk, and that's not true. It is our job to articulate what it looks like in practice, and then make a recommendation going forward. And I suspect other people have got a similar view to that.
Yeah, and Tim, I'm going to throw that one at you next. What do you think is the number one misconception, or even if you just want to expand on what Mark thinks his is?
Yeah, I do think that, Mark hit it, that, there is a misconception that it's a technical role. In some companies, it's going to be more technical than others. Again, there's so many, it depends whenever we're talking these kinds of things. But I think having a good background and understanding as a risk manager, as a risk, someone that understands the fundamentals of risk and risk taking, and being able to build relationships across the company. I can't underemphasize that, or can't overemphasize enough the importance of building relationships and building team, and making sure that a CISO understands the business. It's so critical. I mean, our role in any company, and especially, you may see this in a little bit differently in governmental agencies, a little bit different in nonprofits, but for a company that is especially a public company, but one for-profit company, the bottom line is the bottom line, and we have to support that. And in order to support that, you absolutely have to understand what business you're in and the factors that support that business, and then tune your program to that. So, I would think a strong generalist. Certainly, when I came into the field, or started entering the security field more directly, I took a lot of courses, and some were very technical courses, to kind of spin up so that I have an understanding and a dialogue around the technology. I keep myself fresh on the latest technology. I think it's important. But really having a good, sound understanding of business, a good, sound understanding of risk, kind of blends all those things together.
And Mark Fitzgerald, what about you? What do you think the number one misconception is about the CISO role?
I think, and I see some chat on this, that it's got to be extremely technical. I will say you do need a good technical foundation to be able to understand and be a CISO. So I'm not going to discount that entirely, but unfortunately, a lot of times people that are that technical may struggle with the ability to translate those technical terms into plain English and define them specifically as to what is the risk. My CRO used to say to me, when I would get too technical with her, she would say, "So what?" And she would keep saying, "So what?" to me until I got it down into an English translation as to what the risk is. Instead of talking about the CVE vulnerabilities and the latest patches we need to make, I need to really translate that into something she and then the senior management would understand, because that's where you wind up getting the money and you get the funding. And then, the other side of that becomes the soft skills, in that, I needed 4 strong managers reporting into me to do things that I couldn't. So I can't run the IAM program the way Rich ran it for me, right? So I got 4 really good guys to do their jobs, and then I managed those 4 people. So, that's the other side of this is you really need to, be a leader and manage, while at the same time being technical enough that your folks are going to respect you and understand your knowledge, and you'll be able to give some good direction. So it's kind of a balance.
Go ahead, Tim.
Based on some Mark just said, I probably didn't think through it enough. Probably the number one skill a CISO is a leader, and I practice servant leadership, which I think many people do, but it's really being a leader, selecting the right team, knowing that you have the right team, and then supporting that team in order to really get the job done. So probably at the capstone of everything is leadership.
Well, what I do fear though is that that it might become too much of a leadership position, and other leaders in the organization might discount the technical need that somebody needs to jump into the CISO role. So I do think you need to have run an IAM program, a vulnerability management program, some subset, a GRC program or risk management program prior, or an IT controls type environment prior to assuming the CISO role, where I fear they may wind up sliding people non-technical into the role. And I don't think those people will succeed.
Well,
Maybe I can just qualify.
Yeah, please, Mark. This is the best discourse. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Like I said at the beginning, you don't need to be technical. You need to have a good understanding, general understanding across the whole range of areas. That's a given. You have to be able to understand it. Keeping up to speed with changes across every dynamic in information and cybersecurity at a really technical level is very difficult. The management layer of it is two things. One is the board wants to hear from you and hear your opinion because you've got that diversity of vision. But also, just as important, I think Tim just said this now, if I got it right, you have to protect the team that works for you, because they have to have the ability to give you a viewpoint from being on the ground that they can articulate upwards. And you have to protect them so they feel that they've got that trampoline, parachute, whatever the analogies that you want to use. It's critical, otherwise you lose people in that area. And as we diversify through technologies, and we're all on some form of cloud journey, and we're all looking at SASE and all sorts of other infrastructure and configuration, it's important that we grow those skills out. And it will mean that we become less technical at the bottom level and more managerial. But I also agree with Mark F. that there needs to be a balance. We need to remain connected.
What I really like about this is like there's no perfect answer. I actually think that's evident. The three of you do not have the same career path or the same background, skills, and experience, but you've all done this role or are doing this role well. And I don't serve in a CISO role, so I can't claim to have all the answers and the insights. But one thing I want to say back to you guys and kind of see if you guys agree with, I heard three really distinct pillars. I heard technical enough to understand the risk. I heard a good leader to manage and build the teams to support all of the programs that you have to have. And I heard business savvy enough to understand and align the program to the business. Would you guys generally agree that it is about these three things and balancing your skill sets in those three kind of areas?
Yeah, if you obviously if you're going to sum it up, you just did. So,
okay, well, that's what I was trying to do to see if we were capturing the points well. Now, we have a ton of questions coming in, by the way. So I think, and I'm going to probably check on our co-hosts here to see if they like the idea. I think we're going to maybe do one or two more of the ones that we had come in before the show today, and then I'm going to direct our attention to the ones that have been coming in. So now this one, and this is one that everybody likes to talk about on social media, or even when you watch something about a CISO on TV, and that is, what does the first 90 days of a CISO role look like? What are you asking? What are you trying to figure out? How are you assessing the posture? And Tim, I'm going to have you start with this one.
Okay. Yeah. So I've done that a few times, and that actually, I was early in my career introduced to a book called The First 90 Days, which kind of is germane to the conversation. But my first 90 days, and part of it depends too why you were hired. I mean, so I'm talking in very general terms, but kind of in each time I was hired, there was a slightly different reason. So that kind of forms it too. But I think, from a general standpoint, I think meeting people, building relationships, and asking questions, not making statements. And I've mentored quite a few people. I think there's often a mistake that when someone joins a company, that they feel the need to tell everybody how smart they are. And certainly they wouldn't be that bold, but they come across, I got to prove myself. I don't think so. I think the first 90 days you're building relationships and you're learning. There'll be plenty of opportunity for you to share your ideas later, but it's really learning from people and getting their perspectives and making sure that as you interview, that you're doing it in all aspects of the company, building a strong relationship with your legal and compliance folks, building a strong relationship with your business leaders, building a strong relationship with your technology partners. I don't report into IT and haven't for quite some time, but we have a codependency, right? The CIO and I are joined at hip, and we actually have several CIOs across the business. So I have to, build relationships with them and ask a ton of questions, understand people's struggle, understand their perspective, understand, from, and I can recall at Aflac, the legal team had a much different feeling of priorities for my job than maybe the technical team or, some of the others. So that's what I think the first 90 days are: learning, building relationships, understanding your company, understanding the business need, and then start from there to build out the program.
And Mark Fitzgerald, I'm going to give this one to you next.
I think the three of us have dealt with this when we first went into our roles. In my first 90 days, a lot of it, as Tim had indicated, I wanted to make sure that both my senior executives got to know who I am, the peers who I knew I was going to need their help and support got to know me, and then most importantly, the team that I inherited at the time was only a very small team, but knowing that I would be, with there to help them and support them and expand their careers and their opportunities as well. I think I may have spoken about this, and I think some people on the call may be interested to hear, and I'll challenge them all. I'll say, is this the last company? Is this the last job you're ever going to have? Is this the last company you're ever going to work for? Is this the last boss that you're ever going to have? Right. And I don't think anyone on this call can actually say yes to all three of those questions unless they're about to retire. Right. So I'm upfront with the folks, and that's what I did in the first. I got their buy-in and their loyalty because I knew I couldn't succeed without those four people coming on board with me. But I also think it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, thank you for that, Mark, especially for, kind of highlighting a point that Tim made earlier around being the leader and that being a big part of the first 90 days. Mark Walmsley, what do you think?
Well, there's consistency between all three of the panelists. The first one is to understand the business. What do they actually want to achieve? Because you can't go in with your generic approach to security and just apply it over a single business. They've all got a different way, different appetite. They've got different risk tolerances. So you need to make yourself available and understand the business. Number two is the people who know the things that are wrong are the people who work in security functions, because they live and breathe it every day. The pressure's on them. They can understand where the improvements are and where there are some constraints. It's about building rapport, giving them a forum to listen to and be listened to. The third one is a very straightforward one. I always put in place a governance structure straight away. A board of people who are pro and against and skeptics of security. So they are bought in, we call it skin in the game, but they're bought into and understand what we're trying to achieve. And then you go through your traditional finding out where you are and what the investment looks like. And all of that's achievable because most of it's about people. Three of those are about people. Understand the business, get a board that's going to support you, an operational security board, get your team to trust and support you. There's nothing worse than hearing, we've got a new CISO and I don't trust them. That undermines everything. And then you can do your traditional pieces thereafter. It's all about rapport and understanding the business from my perspective.
And team, we have had, there's some questions that have come in really relevant to this topic, which is like, I don't know, I think 20 people have asked us so far, who should a CISO report to? And so I'd love to hear you guys' perspectives on not just like where you are now and whether it's good, but like what your view of ideal is, or your view of what ideal should look like and why, because it seems like everybody wants to know, where should a CISO report?
I don't mind.
I would say Mark Walmsley, we'll have you go first. Sorry, I forgot to ask you guys. Too excited.
That's fine. The CISOs never reported into IT. There is a general trend in Europe, at least, that the two roles need to be separate. so that you are independently advising. You get it right, and we've got it very right here at Freshfields. You end up working very closely to a CIO and CTO right at the beginning of the strategy, and it becomes an enabler, not a disabler for future vision and delivery. So we will always be independent. We get asked by clients who are setting up functions what our advice is. Most of the big consultancies say they should be independent, but they should have a governance board that looks after both sides, and they're there to ultimately, if there is a dispute between the CISO and the CIO, CTO, they're there to mediate that going forward. And I firmly believe that is the right direction. Otherwise, you have challenges around risk appetite and budgets and all sorts of other things that we've all seen and struggled with for years, no doubt.
And Tim, we're going to throw that one at you next.
Yeah. So I always, like anything, it depends, right? It depends on the company. And, I've heard arguments on both sides. It's interesting. There's a gentleman, very famous author, and was Richard A. Clark. He's with, he's the chairman of Good Harbor Security Risk Management. And we brought him in early on. I had a relationship with him, although I didn't hire him. Our general counsel at the time did. But, he's famous for saying, get security the hell out of IT. And he means that from a standpoint of there has to be strong cooperation and partnership. Similar to what Mark mentioned, we have a security oversight committee that is responsible for oversight of security, technology risk, business continuity, physical security. And we bring that forum together where certainly the technology partner, the CIO is a member of that, people member, voting member. And that becomes the arbitrator of any, should there be any conflict. We have all stakeholders, the risk, our operational risk team, our legal team, HR, et cetera, on that to kind of mediate should there be a disagreement. And that's very strong in our governance and our risk acceptance process. So I think that builds the right relationships. I do think it's not a matter of personality, because quite honestly, we've got a global CIO, think the world of, good partner. We've got business level CIOs, just fantastic relationships, good partners. We all want the same thing. It's more about, I think more about budgeting and money. And over time, what you will see is an erosion of a security budget when you see it combined with IT budget. It happens over and over again. And mainly because, the CIO has to be wholly fixed on creating business enabling technology for business profit and keeping production up, et cetera. That has to be their passion. That has to be what they go after. Oftentimes, then security is not seen as key to that. And so, if everybody's got plenty of money, there's not really a problem. It's always a problem when it comes down to, well, we got to cut 10%. Where's it going to come? And I've seen those decisions erode the security posture.
And Mark, I'm going to have you go next. Before I do, though, just to get our audience talking here a little bit, where does the CISO report at your organization? So if it's CIO, if it's legal, if it's the board, if it's the CTO, let us know in the chat while we give Mark Fitzgerald a chance to tell us, what do you think? Where should the CISO report, Mark?
I am a strong supporter of the CISO role reporting into the risk organization, whether that risk organization is headed by chief legal or chief risk officer. I do think you need independence apart from the CIO or the CTO. And I do think it's a challenge for a lot of the people on the call. Obviously, as you see some of these responses coming in, I was going to state this even prior to that. I know that a lot of these organizations, you may be sort of like, I don't want to use the word stuck because that's got a negative connotation, but you may be trapped under the IT grouping, and the CIO or CTO does not want to give up the cybersecurity function, right? So it's a real political challenge. And the people in that organization don't really have much of a say because it's the senior management at the organization that needs to make that change. In my case, and it's what created my role, the organization faced up to that. The head of audit insisted that the role be independent of IT due to the prior failures that had occurred and the inability to get the program funded or off the ground. They felt it needed direct leadership, and they knew that direct leadership couldn't happen if we remained part of the IT organization. So it really turned out to be just that simple. And if you're aspiring to be a CISO, I do think it would be encouraging to, if you had any opportunity, to look for roles that have already recognized the need for that separateness and independence.
Yeah, I really, there's a certain consensus here around, the importance of working with the CIO, but separately from it. One tip I had got very, very early in my career from a law firm CISO, Mark, was that a CISO and a CIO should be like best friends about availability. They should be talking about availability all the time. But the confidentiality and integrity part of the triangle, the CISO should make sure that they're always focused on their priorities and balance those with the needs of the CIO. But both of them should really come to the table around resiliency and priority. I think you guys have definitely echoed that sentiment. Now, to take our questions in a different direction, I actually really like this one because we've got so many in the chat. Thank you, the audience, again for this. Some of us are earlier in our career and maybe even still going through college, and we're trying to move in the direction that aligns us with a CISO role in the future. What kind of training or even college courses and programs should I try to align myself to? And Tim, I saw you got a smile on your face, so I'm going to start with you for this one.
Yeah, I've been asked this before, and I always recommend doing bomb disposal for a while because it really cements risk management. But in truth, I think it's most important, whatever you pursue, is pursue your passion and then work that into, because if you go down any career route that says, oh, I got to tick this box, this box, this box, and you're not passionate about those things, I think you're going to stumble, if not fail. So I do think, understanding the larger framework of what a CISO is normally responsible for, and pursue something within that framework that you're really passionate and good at. Mark, very, very similar to Mark F. My first real security role, if you want to call it that, was access management. And to this day, it's a passion of mine, right? Because I do see that as the fundamental preventive control, is making sure that, access is well managed and only to the minimum amount that you need. Some people would see it more from, I love forensics, I love security ops. That's what I want to do. And I think that's a great path. At the end of the day, you're going to get to some area that says, I've got to broaden my perspective. But concentrate on your passion, concentrate on core, good, solid leadership skills, and I think you'll be successful. Leadership is about working with people. Leadership, at its very definition, is influence, and that's the part that's really going to separate the individual contributor that's fantastic at their job from the leader.
I really like that. I just wrote that down. Actually, leadership is influence. I'm gonna put that on a post-it note and look at that every day. Mark Fitzgerald, I want to give you that same question next. When I got started, I realized that I didn't understand this business. I got thrown into this role, and I quickly came to the realization I don't know what I'm doing, right? So I got my CISM certification, and I thought that gave me, decent background. So whether you go the CISSP or CISM or both type route, it doesn't hurt to have that. And sometimes it is a requirement of the role that you're looking for. So, I found it valuable. I understand some people may not, but I do think some roles do say that. But, moreover, and this probably doesn't apply just to security, but it still is applicable, where
let your intentions be known. Don't be afraid to say, I'm aspiring on to new and different things, and be vocal about it. Seek mentors out at your company or in the industry that can tell you the roads that they took, kind of like what you're doing now on this call. Set goals for yourself that if by a certain date you won't be still not moving forward if you don't seem to be progressing in the cyber industry, a growing, blossoming industry that has hundreds of thousands of unfilled roles. I do think it's something that you need to take a look at and say, well, why aren't I moving ahead within my current construct or my current role or my current organization, my current boss? Am I not being recognized, or am I not doing the things that I should do? And then last, it's kind of what I'm saying all along. If what you're doing isn't working, then you have to change what you're doing to something that does work. Try something different or a different approach, because if you feel like the approach, you're waiting for somebody to recognize you and then slot you into the next role, you're going to be waiting a long time, because there's nobody that's going to fight for your career more than you will.
And Mark Walmsley, I'm sure you've got some stuff to add in here as well. And I want to tie this together just to another question that came in was specifically pointed to you, which is like, do you think that your experience in the intelligence community gives you a leg up? So I'll ask you the broad question of what kind of training or curriculum you think someone should have to be a CISO, and then the follow-on question of, do you think Intel helped with that?
I'm going to take them in reverse order. I think
I'm good with that.
Intel gives you credibility without saying I was formerly at, is the first point. And there is an attention to detail and ability to deal with high stress situations, which is inherently built into your DNA if you come from military or security services. But I don't think it's fundamentally necessary. But going back to your first question, and there's 2 points to this. For the people who are starting off in their careers here, I've got a different way of doing it. And all of the trainee security professionals that we have, we put them onto tickets on service desk, the most boring job going, and we put them onto audit with clients for 2 reasons. One is you actually understand what security means practically, because we don't all work in the same way. We've got different ways of operating, and you have to negotiate with clients to say, I know you've asked for that, but we do this, and it's comparable. And you also get experience of talking to people in that, not conflict, but in the situation where you have to really articulate why the way that you work is acceptable. Getting that exposure to clients early on, then having the ability to talk to senior members internally about that experience is invaluable. And you learn your trade across the board. Doesn't matter whether it's physical security, personnel, access management, firewalls, you'll see the whole lot. And then we put our staff onto the ISO 27001 standard foundation and then implementing an audit of courses. And we find that works really quite well. And then you talk about the more senior roles out there. So there are the CISOs, the CISPs, and then the certified CISO roles that are out there. They're all super helpful, yes. They definitely help you get through the door for an interview process, but experience is always king. And this is a small world that we're working in, and therefore reputation is important as well. So you have to balance the qualifications with treating people right, delivering. That's just as important, in my opinion.
Being of good character. Now, I'm going to give you guys one more question that came in, because it's clear that you're all leaders. And I want to go in a completely different direction. Not technical question, but how does one go about developing leadership skills, especially if you've never been in any kind of leadership or managerial role? And Tim, I'm going to give you this one.
Leadership, I think, is one of those things it's easy to see it. It's hard to describe it, right? I do think you can develop leadership. You should develop. There is an aspect of science, but I think fundamentally it's do I care for people? The differentiating factor between a manager and a leader, in my opinion, a manager manages things, metrics, etc. A leader leads people. So you have to have a fundamental care for people. if you know, I don't know that you can 100% develop that, but I think you can work on it, right? If you always look at others and you know, follow the golden rule, treat others as you want to be treated. You know, look at it from how can I serve that person to make them better and therefore make the team better, and look at it from that perspective. I think is you know, it's very important. So there's the science side, the leadership techniques that you can study, take courses on, et cetera. But the most important is the human side. Is you know, Mark alluded it to reputation, right? You know, what do others people say about you? There's a leadership axiom is you know, if you're walking along and you look behind you, if you don't see anybody, you're not a leader, right? It's kind of like who's following, who's getting on board, what that influence is, and how you're conveying yourself. It can't be fake though, and you know, I've seen people try to fake the stuff, and it's not fake. I once counseled someone that, you know, when they spoke, their face was not conveying their message. And people pick up on that quick. You know, it's like you know, you've got to be sincere. And if you find that you're not showing the right kind of care for people, go back and address that, because that's the fundamental.
And Mark Fitzgerald, we're going to toss this one at you next. What do you
Sure.
think? What do you think we need to do to be a leader? What do you have to work on to become a leader?
I can tell you, for me personally, the transition that I made, and I think I spoke to this just, you know, briefly earlier, was I converted. I wasn't extremely secure, so I always thought that I had to be the most knowledgeable person and the best person in the organization, and nobody below me could be better or smarter than me. And I think when I realized that was not the right way to think, that bring in people who know more than I do, who are better than me, that made me better, and it made me a better leader, because back to what I said earlier, the four guys that I had leading each function underneath me knew those functions way better than I did, right? So I became consultative to them, and we bounced ideas off each other, and that's where my leadership got better compared to my prior attempts at trying to run those organizations and have those people there just follow my orders, right? So this goes to the idea of servant leader, and I believe Tim or Mark talked to you about it before. You've got to become a servant leader, and your purpose is to serve the people that work for you. And when you do that, it becomes evident not only to your team and you get their loyalty and the buy-in, but it becomes evident to the rest of the organization as well, that you're not out for yourself. And as Tim said, it's got to be sincere. It can't be, I'm doing this just for look's sake. You know, I am not trying to further my career. I'm trying to further the career of the people that work for me. So that's kind of the transition that I made when I think I became like a light went off, and I realized, don't worry about it. What's the worst that could happen? You know, I'm going to have somebody leapfrog and promote over me or become my boss. Well, that would actually be a success story if that were to happen. And one of the most proud achievements that I have is a gentleman that used to work for me. I brought him along, and he has now become CISO at an approximately $20 billion bank here in New Jersey. So I'm real proud that I brought him along in his career, and it's one of the things that I'm most proud of in my career.
And Mark Walmsley, why don't you take that one, and then just to prepare our audience, we got one other question that came in that we're going to do. So we are going to do one more after this, because and there's just so much coming in. So Mark, go ahead.
Leadership roles about making sure that everyone around you has an opportunity to grow. That's the first thing. Second thing, and I can't emphasize this enough, just smiling in leadership roles instills some confidence and relaxes people, because it's the persona. It's really important. People need to come and trust you, not just what you're saying and authenticity, absolutely, and being genuine, but also we have to enjoy the roles as leaders. We've all seen leaders that look miserable, good, but miserable. And that doesn't install any confidence or enthusiasm in the teams. And so there is this big journey around leadership roles. We should never be fearful that the people who work with us, not for us, with us, are better than us. That's an expectation. That's our job, to drive the next generation, should be chasing us up the path. That's exactly the role of a leader. And to make sure that everyone's enjoying it along the way. And you do that by being people persons, person people. One of those combinations.
I'm going to ask our panelists the last question. And Mark Walmsley, we're going to start with you. And that is, like, you got 1 minute. What is your best advice for everyone out there who wants to be a CISO?
Go and pick someone in the industry that you respect and ask them to mentor you, because they will talk you through the journey and they will connect you to everyone. We're all doing exactly that.
All right. I love that. Tim?
Yeah, I think he mentioned the best. I would say develop leadership skills. One of the books that I read early on that really influenced me was called The 360-Degree Leader by John Maxwell. And I say that because, leadership is not just a lateral, it's a circular. You lead up, you lead beside, you lead down, you become a coach, a mentor, a peer, all of those things. So certainly, that would be my advice.
And Mark Fitzgerald?
I would say you've got to embrace change. You can't be afraid to change, whether it's changing roles or organizations or team members that aren't being successful. Just if there's changes afoot, go with those changes. If you don't like those changes, you need to change where you are then. Second thing is, I'd say bet on yourself to succeed. Don't be concerned. I mean, you're your best advocate, as I said earlier, and who better than you to know whether or not something's going to work out for you. And the last thing is, just don't be fearful. Take those chances. If I could rewind back 10 or 15 years, I would have taken a lot more risk and a lot more chances with my roles and my job, my career, my companies than what I did. I was probably played it more conservative than I needed to. So I would say, don't be fearful and bet on yourself.
Thanks, Mark. And I promised our hosts that I would only answer one or two of the questions today. But as someone who feels like they're on this journey that a lot of our audience members are, I do have a tip for you, especially for everyone that was like not in a leadership role yet. This concept of managing up and managing across is one of the first steps that you can take. If you're an individual contributor, you might need to ask may need to tell your supervisor you think things should go in a different direction. And working up the format and the communication to be able to do that, the courage to be able to do that, to act, as Mark Fitzgerald said, that's a great piece of advice. Find the way to manage upward and across, to gain consensus in your beliefs. Because working with others is one of the first things about being a leader. Thank you guys. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Tim. This was a spectacular session. We got to share some great tidbits from your very accomplished careers. I appreciate you, and on behalf of our audience, we appreciate you guys. So thanks for being here.